do we want to live a life that's lived according to the world's ideas of success? Or do we want to redefine that for ourselves and lead a life of true significance? When I was little, I wanted to become a painter. And growing up in a typical Asian family, that was really frowned upon. People were like, a painter? And they would say things like, 那是你的嗜好，不是你的饭碗, which literally means that's a hobby, but it's not your livelihood. It can't fill your rice bowl. And so I did what my family and my parents kind of, urged me to do. It kind of pointed me in that direction. And I ended up pursuing medicine. And when I ended up in medical school, I had this romantic idea that when I graduated, I would end up, serving the poor, maybe working with Doctors Without Borders, or doing something life-changing, something that would impact the world. The problem was that I didn't realize how competitive life would become, or school would become. And before I knew it, I was, really focusing my energy on getting into surgery or ophthalmology, or pursuing something that I thought society would approve of. And I remember just being so consumed by that, because all my peers were, they all had a goal. They all knew what they wanted to do. And at that time, I remember feeling so young and wondering, am I really supposed to know what I'm supposed to do for the rest of my life right now? I remember being even afraid to talk to anybody else about it. I remember thinking to myself that I had to decide right here, right now, and it had to be an important decision. But the truth was that I wasn't ready, and I wasn't even sure if that was what I wanted. But in spite of all that, I worked really hard. I had one foot into the door of pursuing a surgical specialty, and I thought to myself, this is it. That's what I'm going to do. But the turning point came when I married Cliff. And as some of my friends know, Cliff had liver cancer when he was very young, and he ended up going for a liver transplant. And after which he completed an Ironman event and ended up giving all that up, leaving that life behind and wanting to serve the poor. And that experience of being married to him completely changed my worldview. In fact, I think it wrecked me, because suddenly it gave me a glimpse of the brevity of life. Suddenly I saw our lives in the light of eternity, and I realized that what I was chasing after, what I was going for, was suddenly so meaningless. Like all this while, I didn't know. I had in my head that because I had this noble romantic notion of helping the world, that climbing the rat race was okay. I justified it. This was how I was going to get there. But little did I realize that what people were telling me had gotten so much into me that I was going for, the next residency, the next interview. I wanted to do something glamorous and prestigious so that people would respect me and I could help the world at the same time. But it no longer felt pure. It no longer felt like the dream that I had when I was a child. So when Cliff and I got together, we decided that we wanted to take a year off and go to Uganda and serve the poor. And I remember that was such a ridiculous idea to so many people. At the time, it was a very crucial moment of my career. Most of my peers were applying for residencies, and that's when people get into surgical specialties. And that was the same time I was, exploring options to take a year off and do volunteer work overseas. And people just told me the same thing over and over again. They said, Wai Jia, could you rethink this? Maybe if you do it later, you would be more useful. That was actually the primary thing that people told me. They said that if you stayed on longer, if you, hone your skills a little more, you became a surgeon and then you went overseas, that would make such a great impact on the world. But why go now? Why throw all this away? You're comfortable, you've just gotten married, you have a house, you have these interviews at your feet. Why don't you do this first and then talk about helping the poor later? You can do it when you're older, when you have a family, when you're retired, but why now? And I remember thinking about all those things and realizing that I don't have the luxury of an entire lifetime. Suddenly it came to me that we have to live our lives for today. And it wasn't that I didn't care about specializing or I didn't care about becoming more useful, but I realized that somewhere in the equation, I had to find out what it was that I really wanted. Beyond the noise of the world, beyond the noise of society's expectations, I had to figure out what it was that I really wanted. And so we left for Uganda. And I think the scary thing was hearing the constant voices of, you should have been more specialized, or, if you encounter this problem over here, you won't know how to fix it. And, if only you had become a surgeon, you could do so much more. And I kept hearing these voices over and over and over again. It was at times crippling. One day, I remember a little village woman from the village church. She had approached me and she didn't know how to speak English, so she had to get a translator to tell me. But she was so eager, and she said, she called me Dr. Wai. So she said, Dr. Wai, she said, I have something to tell you. She said, I had a dream of you last night. And last night in my dream, I was having a baby. And in that dream, what happened was that you were there. And the baby came out of me. And the baby was going to die. But what happened was that you were there and you put the baby inside of me. And behind you was a man in white. And at the end of the dream, I was all right and the baby was safe. And that dream kind of gave me goosebumps because it just sounded really bizarre. But I thanked her anyway, and I said, thank you for sharing that dream with me. And I literally got a little goosebumpy when a few months later she told me that she had gotten pregnant. So when I found out she was expecting, I was extremely happy for her. And when the baby was about to be born, we were all very excited. And then one day I had a very frantic phone call from her husband. And her husband called me up and said, Dr. Wai, my wife is going into labor, early labor, and they're going to do a C-section on her. So, please pray for us because I'm so anxious. And then a few hours later, he called me again, and this time it was bad news. And he said, our baby was born, with a lot of difficulty, and now our baby has difficulty breathing and is turning blue. What do I do? And at the time, I was so shocked. On the other line of the phone, I remember apologizing to him and I said, I'm so sorry, but I'm not a baby specialist. And I said, there's nothing I can do. And I remember when those words left my mouth, both our hearts broke. He was a first-time father, and I was a medical doctor, and there was nothing that I could do. So when I hung up the phone, I just felt awful. There was no way I could continue with my day. I started texting friends back home and calling them and asking them, what should I do? And they gave me lots of advice. They texted me back, you should do this and you should run these tests, and the baby should be investigated for all these things. But I knew that that hospital that they were at, this little village hospital, had no resources to support any of these investigations. And so I remember sitting on our front porch and my head buried in my hands. I just felt so helpless. And at that point in time, I remembered the dream that his wife had. And suddenly, there was a renewed strength in me. But I started to think, is there any other way that I could help him? And immediately, this idea came to my mind that perhaps what they really need is a referral to the National Hospital. And what they need is just an ambulance. But finding an ambulance in Uganda was not as easy as, picking up a phone and just calling and getting one immediately. I realized that most of the ambulances in that area did not have oxygen tanks. And so I started calling, one company after another, asking them, if they had an ambulance with an oxygen tank. And the funny part was that finally I had found one, and he said that, you have to use mobile money. And I'm like, what's that? You know, and we were new to Uganda still, and my husband and I remember we were running like headless chickens down the hill and through the village, like across all these dirt roads and all these shacks. And we realized that mobile money meant going to one of these little shacks and finding a way to transfer the money in a way through mobile phones to the company to get the ambulance. And for us, this was so foreign. We had no idea how to do this. So imagine two Chinese Asian people running through the dirt roads of Uganda trying to get, you know, this money paid. And I remember so clearly what had happened, that, you know, as soon as that was done, my husband and I, we sat on our front porch. We were just praying desperately, and suddenly we heard the blare of this ambulance siren, and we just said, you know, thank God, you know, they're gonna get the help they need. And the next day we went to visit the baby, and the baby was doing so much better, so much better. They named their baby Divine, and today she's now a little toddler. She's almost 3 years old, and she's doing well, she's bubbly, she's happy, and they send us photos of her regularly. And that incident taught me one thing, that we don't have to be a specialist, or we don't have to be a know-it-all in order to make a difference. Like, so often I think we tell ourselves that we have to be somebody to be somebody. But that incident taught me that no, all we need is to be available and willing for somebody else in need. All we need is to be hands and feet to somebody who needs that care at that point in time. And suddenly I realized that for all the times I had justified, you know, wanting to be more specialized or more important or doing something more prestigious, that it didn't hold water. At that moment, I realized that all this family needed was somebody who cared. And so I think that incident has, in a way, kind of challenged me to rethink what my ideas of success are. So when I came back from Uganda, I sat down and I wrote Savour. I wrote Savour as a way of expressing my frustration and anguish, I think, at my own journey of how I had run and climbed and pursued that corporate ladder that I felt everyone was expecting me to do. And I realized really that when you take a moment just to stop in life sometimes, just to recalibrate, just to savor the season that we are in, that sometimes that can be so much more helpful than running thousands of miles just to chase after what you thought you really wanted. And since that day, my life has taken a huge turn. I ended up doing public health because I realized that what I wanted to do was to effect change in communities, in groups. I wanted to touch lives in the masses. What it taught me was that there is a dream that's waiting to be uncovered inside all of us. And it's so important for us sometimes to take a step back and to ask ourselves, what really is our gift? What really are we good at? And I think so often we're not willing to look at that gift because we think it's too small, it's too insignificant, it's too unimportant. And I think that's why I wrote the book Savour, because it's really about a little cat and he has a gift of growing flowers. But his parents and people around him tell him that collecting stars are so much more important. And all these stars were the awards and achievements that I had gained over the years. And I had to come to terms with myself one day to realize that they did not make me happy. And I was not happy. And it was only when I realized that what I was really meant to do in life became clear to me. One One other story I wanted to share was this incident about my shoes in Uganda. I had already known that it's very difficult to get a replacement for certain kind of things in Uganda. And so one day when I was just about to do my usual morning exercise routine, I opened the door and found my sport shoes missing. And it was the only pair of track shoes that I had had. And I was furious. And immediately I remember the first thing that came to my mind was, somebody took them. Because in the night before, I was telling Cliff, I hear some noises outside, do you think there's anything going on? And in the morning, when I discovered my shoes were missing, it just naturally occurred to me that somebody had taken them. And so immediately, I was very, self-righteous. I was in a huff and I opened the door. I immediately looked around to see if, somebody had taken them. And at that time, we had lived in a health non-profit compound, and I started asking the staff nearby, did you see my shoes? And they were, very helpful. They just said, Dr. Wai, we'll look around for you, but, we're pretty sure that someone might have taken them, someone might have stolen them. And I looked at them, I'm like, who? And I started looking around me and realized that people here were poor. And immediately I was angry, and I thought to myself that someone took it. Someone took it. There was a fence actually in front of our home, and I remember one of the staff members actually telling me, maybe in the night someone from the village nearby climbed over your fence and took your shoes. And I remember thinking to myself, that must have been it. Those were the sounds I heard last night, and I was so self-righteous, so angry. I remember thinking to myself, why am I here helping people who are taking my things? And it was very petty, to be honest, at that moment, but I was just angry. And I remember at that point in time, I took up my cell phone and I called my friend Vero. And Vero was a wonderful cleaning lady who came over to our home to help us, tidy the place about once a week or so. And I remember calling her and asking her, I said, Vero, did you see our shoes by any chance? And I knew the chances were extremely low. I mean, she had left in the evening when the shoes were there, and she probably hadn't even come to work yet. And she was so apologetic over the phone. She said, Dr. Wai, I'm so sorry. I forgot to tell you. You have been so kind to me. I forgot to tell you that I took your shoes to clean them because I saw that they were dirty. Yeah. I remember how red and hot my face became because I was so embarrassed at myself, at the thoughts that I had, and just that anger that had come up with me, the accusations I had hurled at people that I thought I was called to love. I thought that, I had so nobly and altruistically come to serve, but my true colors came out. And all these judgments really just were all revealed in that moment. I think that incident taught me one thing, that as much as we think that we want to help change the world, as much as we think that we can help fix people, that sometimes all we need is to be human and to be friends with people. Because what happened after that really shook me in a sense. I kept wondering, did I impact Vero at all? She was a lady who came to clean our home, and we self-proclaimed to go to Uganda to help people, but did we really effect any change? And I remember just a few weeks ago, actually, Vero contacted me again, and she said, Dr. Wai, I wanted to let you know I graduated from a diploma in business, and I also wanted to let you know I've been promoted. And she sent me a picture over text of a brick house that she had built for herself and her children. She was a single mom when I met her. She was broken. She felt like everybody looked down upon her, and she was struggling so hard. And I think out of all this, she had just thanked me for being her friend. She had never asked me for any of my possessions or my things or money. She had just thanked me for being her friend. And I realized sometimes that all we need to do is just to be a friend. And I guess that incident taught me that we don't have to be confined to the world's ideas of success. We don't have to try to be somebody else that we're not. We don't even have to think of ourselves more than we really are, because all that we're called to do is to follow our heart and just be people. Years later, I had the privilege of pursuing a Master's of Public Health at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. And I remember when I was there, I felt so lost and confused at one point because I felt like I had been sent there with the privilege of being on 3 scholarships and fully funded, but I had no idea what I was called to do. And I had all these opportunities, to work with, the World Health Organization or the United Nations, and nothing fit. And I think I was afraid to admit it to myself at the time, but it wasn't the right fit for me. But I was so scared to say so because after all of these, expectations being placed on me, I thought, surely I have to have something to show for when I go home. But one day I remember it was a near stranger actually who asked me, and he was a professor at a hospital, and he just said, what is it that you really want to do? And suddenly I had to confess, and I told him about Kite Song and about my dream of setting up Kite Song Global. And at the time I didn't know what it was exactly. I didn't know, was it a trust fund, was it an organization, a non-profit? I don't know, but I just told him that was my dream. And suddenly he just said, then go for it. And I thought to myself, this is ridiculous. Like, I don't want people to think that I went through medical school and a Master's of Public Health and then ended up doing painting and writing. And I'm like, what would people think of me? What would people say? I didn't want to be labeled as a picture book illustrator or anything like that. But when I went back that day, I remember telling my husband, Cliff, I said, Cliff, I think I know what I'm meant to do. I think I know why all the doors that I've been knocking on have been closed. I think I know why I've been feeling this overwhelming darkness all these months. At that moment, he said, then yeah, go for it. And I think through all these experiences, I began to see how success is not about wealth or achievement or awards. It's not about living up to the expectations that society has on us or we have of ourselves. That so often, success, true success, comes from a deep place of where we place our significance in. And that significance can only be revealed to us when the noise of the world is pared away, when the noise of the world quietens down, and we come to terms with what our real dreams really are deep inside. So I really think that life is too short not to savor. Life is too short to be spent climbing the rat race, chasing after something we thought we wanted, but really would never make us happy.